120 plus long form conversations published before most people even start. Jack Wagoner has built a podcast centered around introspection, identity, and the hidden trade offs before ambition starts. Through consistent interviews with people like Elliot Buick, David Meltzer, and billion-dollar founders, he's created a perspective on what drives progress versus just what feels productive. Today's conversation will cover how to think more clearly, what separates progress from being busy, and how ambition, identity, and fulfillment cross over and interact over time. Jack, welcome to today's show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ethan.
Likewise. So, just to get started, then, Jack, what are you optimizing for right now? And what are you deliberately choosing not to do at the age of 19?
I'd say the thing that I've been optimizing for the most in this specific time in my life is building connections with the people that I think are going to move me forward, gaining the respect of the people that have done the things that I want to do. I think for a long time, I had this idea that like I saw everyone doing things by themselves on social media, and I was like, all right,
Mhm.
I'm going to do it that way. And it wasn't until I started to invest in myself and learn from people that have done the things that I want to do, that have been in my shoes and have gained the success that I want, that I started to actually make progress in the areas that mattered to me. And so finding those connections and building them up, whether it's slowly, because some of the bigger connections they take time to really develop respect and mutual respect, right? Um, and developing those connections at a deeper level has been something I'm really optimizing for right now. And what that means is I have to sacrifice certain things. So, for example, I've started posting on LinkedIn more where these people are operating, and I'm posting less on Instagram, optimizing more for the connections I'm getting off camera than maybe the higher view counts on social media I was getting when I was posting more consistently on Instagram, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great point. And for me, and for context for the viewers, Jack just graduated high school recently, and he was from the same state of New Hampshire as I am, Dover High School, I believe, and it's visible on your LinkedIn, so I'm not just doxing you. And now he goes to Northeastern. So when it comes to your optimizing for, and then your like podcast in general, what made you start the Grateful podcast?
When I was younger, I very quickly realized that no matter how much I did, I was never going to truly feel fulfilled. It was this constant race to do another thing and do another thing and do another thing, chasing this feeling that I thought achievement would bring me. And there's this very specific moment that I reference often where I was standing in front of the mirror in my bedroom in France because I did my junior year of high school abroad in France. It was another one of those crazy steps I took that I thought might just bring me the happiness I was looking for. But at this point, I'd started my first business and I wasn't doing insane numbers by any means, but I was doing some stuff that not most 17-year-olds are doing. I had 4 employees. I'd learned French fluently and gained friends in a country that I didn't know anybody in. And I felt emptier than I'd ever been. It was like I had all the things that were supposed to make me happy, but I didn't feel it. And at this point, I started to realize, all right, something's going to need to shift because I don't want to feel like this for the rest of my life. I don't want to chase something that feels like I'm never going to get there. And so I started to do a lot of introspection. I started to think about what needs to change for me to actually feel the way I want to feel. And I developed this thesis, this idea that we have to be both extremely grateful for where we are right now while also still having those goals. Because I knew that those goals would never end. People like me, people like you, people listening to this podcast, we have huge goals, and that's integral to our progression and to our fulfillment. We can't just let those go. They're always going to be there, but we can't tie everything to their accomplishment. And so I wanted to explore this further because I was just a 17-year-old kid. What did
Mhm.
I know? I wanted to talk to the people that I've been listening to for so long talk about these things, the people that influenced me to have these ideas. And my biggest idols at the time were like Jay Shetty and Ed Milet. And I wanted to talk to them. I wanted to be in rooms with them. And that's still what I'm working toward. And I thought that a podcast would be the best way for me to explore that concept and to meet incredible people and eventually get in those rooms doing it.
Yeah, 100%. And as well, for the viewers listening, probably when this is uploaded, the previous episode was the one with Darren Lee, and I spoke with him about what you just covered, Jack, when it comes to how can I get my name out there while fulfilling my goals, and how can I get in the room where it happens. So whether it's Id Milet, Jay, Samit, one of the people that I just recently interviewed, and now you, I found that the podcast method to indirectly get your name out, and then maybe eventually through the relationship building that you may have with those can potentially lead to business outcomes, friendship outcomes, etc. So when it comes to everything that we just talked about, it all kind of boils down to strategy and execution, patterns, etc. So what's a pattern that you've seen in people who think they're making progress but are actually not?
I think a pattern that comes up very often with those people is they didn't take the time at the beginning of whatever working toward what they're working toward to figure out what it is that they actually want. So people that feel like they're making progress but aren't, a lot of them don't quite know what they're working toward. They don't have a clear specific goal. I mean, there's data out right now that 97% of people don't have a clearly written goal. They don't know what they're working toward. But if you were to ask the most successful people, if I ask the most successful person that's making the most progress, what are you working toward? It's instant. They'll tell me exactly what it is that they're working toward, what their goal is, when they're going to have it by, an amount of money attached to it. And I think that so many people have all of these different data points kind of coming at them from social media. They're scrolling like, oh, I want to move to Dubai. Oh, I want to start a growth marketing business. I want to do YouTube automation. I want to blah, 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 blah. And they don't really know what it is that they want. And that allows them to feel like they're making progress. They feel like, oh, maybe I had a breakthrough there. That's my next thing. But they're not actually taking the action that's moving the needle.
Yeah, and I feel that is what separates the majority of people to the ones who are making progress and getting actions. They think that they learned this new strategy technique that's amazing, but what's the point of the strategy technique? It's for you to execute upon it. So I believe that's really practical and very useful for the people listening. So when it comes to podcasts, of course, the conversation tends to be questions, answers. What are 3 questions that if people who are struggling to find that identity, who they are, what are like the 3 questions or the questions they should ask themselves to get to their goals and find out what they want to do?
I think the first one is what we just talked about. What is it that I really, truly want? And that one's so important. And this isn't me saying this. This is centuries of success material. I think a lot of this goes back to Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, where he interviewed hundreds of the most successful people, all centering around Andrew Carnegie, who's the richest man that ever lived, and figured out the patterns that made these people successful. And they all talked about figuring out what it is that they really truly want. And then on top of that, I think you have to ask yourself, am I willing to do, or first, I think it's important to ask yourself, am I able to do that? Am I able to do the things that will make me do this? And then the third question, and the most important one is, am I willing to do so? Because if we're willing to do so, then we make a decision that no matter what, we're going to get what we want. And then those 3 questions, if you ask them and you answer them honestly, then I don't think it's possible for you to not get what you want. It might take a long time, it might not, but I think that those 3 questions will make you clear on what it is that you want, and then you'll get that.
That's good. So once you figured those out for yourself, Jack, those 3 questions, what did you do after that?
I started to take action. I mean, I I think that an important part of those questions that I left out of the last answer is you immediately have to take action upon them, and then you have to stay committed and stay down that path, and kind of block out all distractions. And that's not always something I was good at. I would stay. The first time I asked myself those questions, it was with my first business, which was a YouTube automation company uh, back when I was 17 years old. I started it, and I asked myself what I really wanted. Hmm, I really wanted money, is what I said. And money's very important, but I didn't quite get as deep back then as I could have, and when I did it again and made the commitment to myself for this podcast. And then I started to get distracted because I stopped seeing the results that I really was getting and that I was attached to, because I was really attached to those results, nothing around the goal itself.
Mhm.
And that's another really important part, where you have to really know that it's what you want, not what you think you can do. I think a lot of people, they do things that they think they can do, not that they're truly emotionally connected to. And when
Mhm.
we're doing things that we think we can do rather than things that we truly want to do, when we stop seeing progress in that, it's like, oh, maybe I can't do this. You start to doubt that, oh, maybe I can't do this anymore. And it allows you to quit. But for me now, that I realize, all right, what I really truly want is to be able to impact people on a wide level through my curiosity, and be able to do that and help people realize that fulfillment comes before, not after the achievement, sustainably. And I realized that I'm going to do that through podcasting in the first way. Podcasting and speaking is what it's turning into now. And when I realized that, I started to see hiccups in the road. I saw the most growth in my show in terms of numbers last summer, when I was putting the most time into it without school, right?
Yeah.
And then over the winter time when we first talked, it was dipping. But right now, I I've stayed with that vision, and it's going back and it's accelerating past where it was in the summertime. And it's just because I stayed consistent and committed to the I am willing decision
Yeah.
after the question that I asked myself.
Yeah, that's great. And I know we covered a lot about your past. I want to kind of move that conversation over to present Jack when it comes to the optimization. I know you just mentioned that you had a like little bit downward trend during the winter time when we first initially spoke, and now it's slowly coming up. And I believe that increasingly comes from the hockey stick of growth that a lot of people talk about when it comes to the optimization. I know you covered the thinking through these, the right actions, but sometimes people have to look back and find like what actually drove the needle. Is it this or that? So when it comes to you asking questions to those podcast guests, what's your thought process on how you create those questions? And then what are like the three favorite types of questions that you ask to your guests?
I think that my favorite questions to ask are the ones that nobody's asked before. I have guests on that have been on hundreds and hundreds of shows, some of them at least. For
Yeah.
example, I had Dr. Anne-Moore Leconf, who wrote Tiny Experiments, and she's a neuroscience professor in London here. But Tiny Experiments blew up as a book, and for her book launch, she did 60 days of podcasts in a row, and she's
Wow.
done, I don't know what the number of podcast interviews is, but she's done a lot of them and she's done the big ones. And so I
Mhm.
was like, man, she's been asked so many questions. What am I going to do to ask her the questions that nobody's done before? And I realized that I had to come at it from the perspective of, well, she's never been interviewed by someone my age before.
Mhm.
And I need to come at it with a very authentic perspective. So my favorite questions to ask are often the ones that relate to my life, are the questions that I've been asking myself, that I think I would love someone like that to answer, because I know that the audience I've built is people of my same type of curiosity. And so when I ask something that truly resonates for me, it'll truly help other people that are listening as well. And then I'd say, if there are three types of questions I ask, um, there's multiple angles you can go with every guest, right? Each
Mm.
one's different, but there are a few kind of broad archetypes of questions. And I think we have backstory ones, and then we have overcoming ones. So, what did you learn from this challenge? I think that's a big one that I love to ask, because a lot of my guests have had some type of negative, objectively negative event in their lives that has ended up causing so much of the growth and extraordinary things that they have. And I love that type of question. It's one of my favorites to start with. So, backstory, those, and then if they have some type of key insight that they've talked about, if they have a framework that they talk about. I like to try to apply that to an interesting area or make a
Yeah.
metaphor with it. In the first big guest I had on my show, his name was Nick Pollard, and the people displeaser. He was on Modern Wisdom, and he talks a lot about people pleasing. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out he's talked about this so many times. How can I relate this to something that no one ever has before? And I related it to Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I said, it feels like you're going against the most famous book besides the Bible ever. And he's like, no one's ever said that to me, but it's so true. So relating things to a more applicable and broader thing that they haven't really thought about before, I think is a cool way of me showing my curiosity and also just framing a question in a slightly different way.
Yeah, that's great. It's bringing people 0 to 1 on sub parts of their life. When it comes to the questions that you ask, the research that you do, I want to put a quick pin on the research that you do to get those guests, whether it is Blaine Bartlett, David Meltzer, Elliot Buick, etc. Can you walk me through the step-by-step process on the research side before you have the show with the guest?
Yeah. So there are a few steps that go into it, and I'd say my first step is listen to a full podcast with them, at least one. Full podcast they've been on before by someone that I think is a really good interviewer. And for most of my guests, they've been on podcasts before, so it's not difficult. At the beginning, I didn't always get to do this because not all my guests had always been on interviews, but now it's almost a prerequisite. Like, okay, my guest should be on an interview before, and I like to listen to it in one time speed, preferably, so I can get to understand their speaking patterns. I learned this from Chris Williamson. He talked about this on one of his very old videos where he would listen to it on 1x speed so he could understand their speaking patterns so he wouldn't accidentally interrupt them. Um, and then try to figure out where I thought the host didn't go deep enough. So if there was a point where the guest said something that was really interesting, it's like, well, I felt like there was a peak there, but they could go a little bit deeper. It's like, all
Yeah.
right, that's where I'm going to write it down, and I'm going to pinpoint that, and I'm going to go deeper into that than the host did. I think that there's emotion there that was untapped, and it's finding those untapped moments. So I'll do that with one podcast. If I find sufficient stuff, then that's where I'll start like my research from. If not, then I'll listen to another. If it's a really exciting guest for me, I'll listen to a ton, or I'll already have listened to a ton of their content. And then I get to kind of create already from that place of like, all right, here are the questions I've been wanting to ask them. So I find those untapped moments, and then I go through their story and I kind of try to create some type of narrative.
Yeah.
Um, and then I figure out roughly where I want to start with them. Do I want to start on their insights? Do I want to start kind of edifying them through their story and bringing credibility through what they've gone through? And that's where the next part of the research kind of goes into their backstory, into what makes them them. Have they already told their backstory enough that I don't need to spend so much time on it, and I can just say it in the intro? It's a lot of different debates that depend on the guest, and then I'll use Claude, and I'll kind of bring together. I've created an artifact where I can just type in the guest name, and it does this pretty fast now. But it basically pulls together all the media possible it can find on them and tries to find angles that haven't been touched yet.
Okay, that's great. And when it comes to the research side, my thought process for podcasts are very similar, and your method is very similar to mine. Few nuances though. When it comes to how I structure my podcast, I know you've had a lot more experience than me when it comes to this, but probably this is my like seventh or eighth so far. My thought process is first, who is this for? Like, who do I want to watch my videos? So for
Hmm.
instance, I label this as like a content operator series. So it's more of those expert level questions compared to the beginner friendly ones. And like I said to you earlier, like I don't want these questions to be along the lines of like, how important is working hard? It, of course, the obvious answer is it's super important. It's like, really? So when it comes to my style, I found what works best for my thought process, and feel free to jump in when it comes to this, is first I find all the content that is on their platform. So for instance, for you, I took the most recent podcasts that you did, and then also I created a ChatGPT chat of just a tailored folder called Jack Wagoner. And I took all the questions from previous podcasts and the ones that you asked guests that got the excellent, great question, and frame that question to be more of a framework, broaden it, and then tailor it to the questions I'll be asking you later on. And second is just what you said earlier, like how they speak when it comes to how they operate. For instance, I listen to you, how you speak, how much you smile during your podcast, how much your eyes glow up, like just what you're doing right now. So I found that those are really good things that work. And also it's studying how they speak as well when it comes to how they articulate themselves. So you had Elliot Buick on the show. He's phenomenal. I've just been starting listening to his podcast because of the recommendation you gave me. And phenomenal. I love the one I think with Blair White. And the first
Yes.
question that he asked was diabolical. It was funny. And I saw the comment section with Jack Neal, and it was best opener. Oh, like the one something along the lines of that, like best question ever to start for the intro. So when it comes to all the podcasts out there, what are a few that you look up to and study?
Yeah, I think that it's really important. I know you know this in the content space to not just study the giants, but study the people that are growing at the fastest pace. And I'm
Mhm,
so lucky that I connected with Elliot when I did, because I connected with him. I think he'd published one episode so far, and he's worked with incredible people. And that's how he's gained so much experience and knowledge. And he is
mhm,
naturally a very gifted, curious, intelligent guy. But I love listening to his podcast because he breaks it down to such a science. And I also love listening to another friend and one of his best friends, Chris Griffin, because I think they're very opposite. Where Chris is very emotional and he's very emotionally intelligent. Elliot is as well, but Chris really leads with that emotion and he leads with trying to get into the emotion of the guests. And so those are two of the people that I look up to and study the most, along with Chris Williamson, because he's grown so much and he's an example, one of the first people that didn't really have a platform and leveraged YouTube and really grew himself. So when I started out, I would really study Chris. Nowadays, I think that he's one of the giants, and he's kind of calmed down on the things that helped him get there because he's at a point where he doesn't need to do some of those things anymore.
mhm.
Um, but he's another one that I like to study. And then Jay Shetty was one of my first real favorite podcasts, first one I really listened to. And I love trying to figure out how he gets so emotionally deep with the guests, how he asks his questions. And I like to study more of his old stuff as well, because now he just interviews celebrities. No shade to
Yeah.
him, but that's not where I want to go.
Yeah, that's great. Mine are similar. Jay Shetty is not included, but to replace another famous name, Diary of a CEO, I don't study really his questions. I study how he makes his podcast engaging, whether it
Yes.
comes with a mystery challenge or him introducing, like you said this 20 years ago. So it shows the effort of his and his team's research. And it's also like the interactive factor. Like you have $1,000, I think it's the one with like Hermosi, Cody Sanchez, and he says like, what would you do in this situation? And they just broke down the entire roadmap, making it very tactical for the person to speak their mind and for the audience. So to make this conversation more tactical when it comes to not necessarily starting a podcast, but getting those phenomenal guests, what is your outreach process looking like when it comes to getting the guests that you'd like to get on your show?
Yeah, that has changed so much over the past 2 years because at the beginning, I had no connections. It was
Mhm.
just cold, cold, cold. And I estimate I sent like in Instagram DMs, LinkedIn, and emails around 10 cold messages, or no, not 10, 200 cold messages before I got my first guest I was really proud of on the show,
Mm,
Nick Pollard. And before that, I just had on like my dad and my mom and a friend down the street who's an incredible singer songwriter, but just people that I already knew. And
mm,
once I got Nick on, I started asking every single guest, is there one person that you think you would love to introduce me to for the show? And
mm,
that kind of just compounds. And I started to build these relationships. And now I don't even have to do all my outreach. I get people inbound that want to come on the show. And most of the guests I have on my show are still outbound or still me reaching out or are still mutual connections that I've been referred referred to by previous connections. But some of the people that are messaging me to come on the show are very elite level guests, and it's a really cool switch to see how fast that's happened.
mhm,
But yeah, I'd say that when I structure my outreach, um, and I can send you how I structure it later, it's really shifted over. At the beginning, it was more of like a kid like, I have a mission, I have a goal, and I
mhm.
want you to buy
I would
into it,
love
right?
15 minutes of your time kind of
Yeah,
message.
it
Yeah.
it it very it created like a really hierarchical relationship because I didn't know much then. I didn't have much to stand on. I wanted them, right? And now it's very opposite where it's kind of I'm leading with my credibility, what I've done. I'm like, all right, 125 plus episodes, top 2.5 show,
Mm,
percent show. These guests have been on the show. And here's a video showing how much they loved my interviews.
yeah.
I would love to have a chat with you, and I kind of list that out, showing them their benefits and show them the growth of the show and all things like that, right? Like 1,700 YouTube subscribers, things along those lines. Where it's like, all right,
Mm,
this is going to benefit them. They don't have to buy into me anymore and help me out. Yeah, I'm actually helping them by them coming on the show. And I always say, because I truly believe it, I'll give you the best interview you've ever had. And I say
yeah.
that boldly because some of these people have been on Diary of a CEO, Modern Wisdom, um, and they're incredible interviewers. But I believe that the skills I've developed, and I still have so much to learn and grow, but I think I am a fantastic interviewer. And that helps, that confidence that I didn't have at the beginning definitely helps me land more guests now, too.
Yeah, that's great. And like I said, my process is very similar to yours. It's like the family tree effect. I get you. I can say, hey, I just interviewed Jack. He was amazing. I want David Meltzer on the show, or I want Blaine Bartlett on the show, and using that as leverage. It's very similar to what Jack Neal did to grow his podcast. He said, I just interviewed Andrew Tate, one of the most controversial characters, and now I can get anyone in that business space because Tate's all the way up there. So when
Hmm.
it comes to looking back of all those conversations that you had, what's something that you used to believe about ambition that you now think is either incomplete or wrong?
That's a great question. I think that ambition, I used to believe, was the only prerequisite to success. And that's true if success to you doesn't include that feeling of fulfillment or happiness, whatever you use to describe that feeling that you have inside. And for some people, that's true. For some people, it seems like all they mean by success is the monetary, is the fame. But I realize that that's not what success means for me. And ambition alone was never going to get me that fulfillment that I really truly craved as a result of all of my achievements. And I realized that ambition was not the prerequisite, was not the sole prerequisite to this. I had to have something that was complementing it because ambition alone would lead me to be burnt out. Ambition alone would lead me to create this massive gap between where I was, where I wanted to be, and where I wanted to be no matter where I was, no matter how hard I worked, right? So I realized that ambition alone was not the only thing. I realized that without something holding me here in the present, I was never going to be able to fulfill what I wanted through just ambition. So I started to be grateful for what I have right now, which sounds like such an arbitrary thing. It's like, all right, that's a little bit woo woo, you're grateful and now everything's
Yeah.
better, right? But I realized that gratitude wasn't what everyone thinks it is. And gratitude didn't have to be some woo woo whatever idea that spiritual gurus talk about. I mean, I didn't grow up in an area where I would like really just think about gratitude like that. My mom always talked about being grateful, and we learned at the dinner table to say what we were grateful for. But I didn't understand its importance. I was an athlete. I grew up in a macho athletic environment in a lot of the culture I surrounded myself in. So it was very different to think about this. But I realized that I needed to have something grounding me in the present, because with just ambition, if you're just purely ambitious, you actually end up devaluing the one thing you're ever truly guaranteed, which is what we have right now. Our life is always going to be the present moment. And I don't want to live the rest of my life feeling like right now isn't enough unless my ambition carries me somewhere, right? And so I started to say, all right, I have things in my life right now that make it amazing that I can live with while still working with that ambition. Because without this gratitude aspect, which I believe is the conscious appreciation of the things that make your life better. It's the active focus on abundance in your life, not focus on the lack and limitation. I believe that with that, you're really able to propel yourself forward in a way that's sustainable, where you're not going to burn out. Does that make sense to you?
Well said. Yeah, 100%. And I do have a few points to add on to what you said when it comes to the ambition. First thing for me, when I realized that I'm the kid in high school who has some business experience, some podcast, I tended to think that this mission will bring me further, but it also goes back to like you must consistently execute each and every time. So you mentioned that how people think of you and how you think of yourself. I want to quickly put a pin on what people thought of you right now as that student in college of like what do they say, but not necessarily around that. Where do people misunderstand you or your content the most? And why do you think that you could say happens?
I think that the most misunderstanding around my content comes from people our age, because I believe that people like me and you, we've matured faster than most people our age. And most of Gen Z, most 18, 19-year olds are not thinking about these ideas. They're not having these conversations. And there are people like us. I mean, I surround myself all the time with them because they're the people that make me better, they're the people that make me grow. But I think that most of the misunderstanding comes from people that are like, why does my mindset really matter? Why does what gratitude, Jack? Why are you making content about that? Like, well, why don't you just like focus on your school? Why are you asking business owners about their mindset? What's the correlation? And people our age really misunderstand these things because they haven't taken the time to dive into them. And so I think my content is very tailored for people that have already built some understanding around this. It's like you talked
Mhm.
about earlier, it's not really the basic level content. It's not the introductory content. People can go elsewhere for that. But that's where a lot of the misunderstanding comes, in particular from peers of our age group.
Yeah. For me, it just goes back to two things, like how I conduct myself in conversations like these compared to conducting myself with, let's just say, my classmates. They're all fantastic, they're amazing, but it's also the balance of how much should I share to them and then how much should I share not to them? So for instance, I'm known as the business kid, person who's done millions of views of social media, runs a theme page, and one of my nicknames at school is Mr. Wealthy Guy, which is one of the theme pages that I run, which is funny. So for me, it just goes back to what things will I, looking back 40, 50 years down the road, it just goes back to like that gratitude, the fulfillment, those reasons why people do things like this, the legacy, the impact, religion. For me, it's what things looking back will I remember and what not. I learned this from the Chris Williamson podcast. I forget with what guest, but I repackaged it and call it memory maxing. What things will I remember 50, 60, 70 years down the road, and what ones will I not? Let's optimize for the memory maxing ones. So for instance, each and every day, I try to go at least out of my comfort zone at least once per day, whether it is shooting your shots with someone or at like sending those DMs. I try to do these each and every day, whether it comes through health, wealth, relationships. So when it comes to you on working yourself or getting the work done so you can go to your goals, let's say, to make this more tactical for the viewer, if someone had, like us students, if someone only had 10 hours per week to work on themselves or their path, where should that time actually go?
Hmm. Well, again, it depends on their goal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are they, when we're talking about working on ourselves, do you want to talk more about a business sense or maybe in the gym, health wise?
Floor is yours, is up to you.
Okay. Well, I think that first off, a lot of things and a lot of discipline that can be used in business should start and is easy to start in the gym and with a health routine. And that's where I started. I mean, my first discipline it was waking up early every morning and going on runs before school. And oh my God, like we're both from New Hampshire. I did this throughout the winter time. 5
I feel
a.m.
I feel
snowy New
sorry for your
Hampshire.
skin. I feel sorry for your
Yeah.
skin.
I would be crying from the cold while running outside. And that's where I built a lot of discipline. I built doing the hard things. I memory maxed, as you said. I remember some mornings like just laughing. Well, I see this purple sunrise in the snow, and I loved it. But that is where I think I started. And a lot of the time, the very precious time that I had to myself to work on myself was spent in the gym or outside running and meditating and all these things that are kind of the I guess stereotypical like self-improvement way to start. I think that that's the easiest way to get into this world. And then once you start to get more comfortable with that. Once it starts to the uncomfortable starts to become comfortable, you need to continue pushing that comfort zone. And
Mhm.
the next step for a lot of people in this world when they do that is in a business sense, right? Let's apply these mental tools we've gained to make money, to make a difference, and that for me was a really good next stepping stone. It was a great way to apply that those skills I'd learned that aren't learned in many other ways uh, to better myself in another way, in another discipline. So I'd say for people that haven't really built up those mental muscles yet, I'd say start physically, start eating well, building good habits, and then you can start to you because you become more efficient through that as well. And then once you do that, you are able to start to apply that to business, and then divide your time differently there as well.
Yeah, 3 points on what you said. First, back to the memory maxing, just one of my favorite words of the week or favorite phrases you could say. One very simple example for this, for like tactical, is I walk through my school's hallway each and every day. One very thing that I could remember from it is just by deciding to like all the papers on the wall that says like join this event is just to walk through them and just like hit them each and every time. I remember that compared to me just walking through the hallway.
Yeah.
Second point, I feel, and I know you talked about this on your most recent podcast. I forget her name, but the billion dollar founder. And I love this point. It's people who are deciding to like get started in this space, whether it's self-improvement, business, health, wealth, relationships, they always look for the one fancy thing that can 10x their current situation in 10 seconds. One very fun example of this is like, hey, ChatGPT, please make me a billionaire in the next 30 seconds. I'm begging you. It's very similar to that type of mindset. And I found that it's more of the just simple actions. For instance, my self-improvement journey is like, I'm asking myself or asking AI based off of what you know about me, tell me something that I don't know. And that's the wrong question to ask. It's more of, I know what are the steps that take to success. Why am I not doing them? You do not need the extra fancy tool. You don't need the extra side guru paying for $1,000, $5,000 course. It's just right, consistent action on a few simple things, and that's it. So there's no fancy secret to success. It's just the right actions each and every time.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think it's not hard. It's just it's very simple, but it's so hard to actually get yourself to do that, to understand the simplicity of it. People like to complicate things.
Yeah, that's great. So when it comes to who you are now, and then eventually who you want to be, Jack, in the business space, what are your plans of monetizing either your podcast? I know you recently just had like a sponsorship, so you probably had some payment affiliate link from there. But what does current Jack think future Jack will look like 5 to 10 years down the road from now?
5 to 10 years down the road, I haven't been, I guess, building the picture as clearly for that as I have 1 to 2 years. And 1 to 2 years down the road, and then we can get to what it might look like at
Yeah,
scale, right? But right now, in the next few weeks, I'm landing a lot of there's a lot of sponsorship calls happening behind the scenes for the podcast. And so that is most of the monetization coming immediately in in an attempt to then go more in person with all my interviews, because I have people that have confirmed they'd want to come on the show, but only in person across
yeah,
the US. And I want to be able to pay to fly out and have a very nice production, have a team to then produce clips. And I want the show to be making money to pay for that. Right. So that's where things are going very soon. And then on top of that, I just gave a TEDx talk. And at the
I
TEDx
love that.
talk, there was one of my fellow speakers was an executive at a certain company, and he said, "I'd love for you to speak on this at my company." And that goes along with the other work I'm doing, which is this summer I'm working with one of the top keynote speakers and corporate facilitators in the country on the topics that I like to speak about. And I'm learning from him directly all of his processes so that I can um, start doing more in that space, because I think that's where I can apply a lot of value to the world. I think that the topics that I speak about don't just apply to an individual level, they apply to a cultural level. And if we can change some corporate culture, one, that's a way for me to make a massive difference, and also a way for me to fund the podcasts in a way that gets to even have a bigger difference. So that those are the two main goals. And what I see myself doing in the next year or two is working with dozens of companies around that, potentially working with universities and speaking at other universities around the same things to help spread awareness around these topics at our age level as well. And then growing the podcast to a point where it's mostly or all in person and
Yeah,
sponsored by incredible companies, and it's generating revenue on its own.
that's great. And for me too, I'm planning to eventually go in person. I already have like a few potential places to go, places I looked at, like, hey, and I spoke to a company that does it. It's like, we will, we have these settings in place for podcasts. But for me, it's with the recent episode with Elliot Buick, and then I forget his name. They recently filmed a podcast in California that looked very similar to the Grand Canyon, if you're familiar with that.
It was Chris. It was Chris
It
Griffin
was
who I talked about.
Chris,
Yeah.
oh yeah, Chris Griffin. So with those two people, they said, we just revolutionized podcasting. And how I thought about it was they didn't revolutionize podcasting by the guests' questions. They revolutionized it by the background. When it comes to these in-person, natural, amazing experiences. And they talked about the story that they got there as well of we were super sweaty, super tired. We manually brought up all the equipment on the hill that we climbed. So I feel that 100% that in-person podcast opportunities is the now new trend compared to these online things as well. However, when it comes to these all like in-person things, it's of course way harder to schedule. You have to have more need to fly out. So all those like nuances that you have to acknowledge. So to quickly transition out of that thing, how was your TEDx talk at Northeastern?
It went so well. It went so well, Ethan. Like I spoke mostly about the duality of gratitude and ambition framework I've developed and my
Yeah,
story in getting there, and then comparing it with, for example, Michael Phelps' story and other high performing individuals, and then diving deep into what it really means. And I didn't memorize it word by word. I didn't feel like that
mhm,
would be the most authentic way. I very much chunked it, and I had certain lines that I said the same every time. But there were
yeah,
parts of it that I didn't say the same every time. And there were some versions when I was practicing where I'm like, that one sounded better than that one. And the one that I gave on stage, it was my first speaking engagement where I spoke about these topics that I'm really genuinely passionate about.
yeah.
And it was the best version of the talk. It was the best of all the practice rounds. So it went very well.
And that's with what everyone says about AI, that's the worst you're gonna be. And then you're gonna get better each and every time. For myself too, I've done in-person presentations. I actually have one, let's see, next week in Wednesday for my class for all the teachers talking about things that I'm super passionate about, i.e., social media, and training myself to have that script, but also make it more of a framework. Because for both of us, we both know how to speak fluently, articulately, can easily just yap, but it's also efficient yapping as well. So to slowly wrap up, I usually have one very introspective question for guests. And it's not one I'm going to ask to Darren Lee, but it's to you. So after all the conversations that you've had, what's one question that you can now ask yourself that you weren't asking before, let's say episode 1 or 2?
Huh. Question I can now ask myself. That's fantastic, Ethan. I think I can now ask myself, truly, because I could have hypothetically asked it before. But now I can truly ask myself, are you really doing what you want to be doing? And are you taking advantage of this life that's given to you? Are you doing exactly what Jack in his dream at the beginning when he first started this? Are you doing exactly what he would have wanted you to do? Are you taking shortcuts? Are you are you trying to make it easier on yourself? Are you doing the things that are making his dream happen? Because back then it was just in here. And I love the idea that everything that we see as being created twice. It was created in the mind and then it was created in reality. And back then, before episode 1, the podcast in itself was just an idea in here. And now it's physical. It exists, and I get to ask myself every day, am I doing the things that are bringing that true vision to life? Or am I copying out in some way? And every day I try to take the action that is actually bringing it to the place that I first had it in my mind.
That's phenomenal, and that's a great place to end today's podcast. This has been the Content Operator Podcast with your guest, Jack Wagoner. Appreciate you your time, man.
Thank you, Ethan. This was amazing.